The rain fell in sheets that October afternoon, turning the cemetery into a watercolor painting of grays and greens. Margaret Holloway stepped out of her black Mercedes, her designer heels sinking into the soft earth as her umbrella caught the wind. At 73, she had learned that wealth could buy almost anything, except the one thing she needed most. It couldn't bring back her daughter. She walked the familiar path toward Emily's grave, her heart heavy with the weight of 15 years without her only child. The marble headstone gleamed even in the dreary weather, and Margaret clutched the white roses she brought every month, their petals already dampened by rain. But as she approached, she stopped abruptly. Two figures huddled beside her daughter's grave, a man in worn maintenance coveralls and a little girl no older than 7, both soaking wet. Margaret's first instinct was anger. This was her private grief, her sacred space. But something made her pause. The man was crying, deep, shuddering sobs that shook his shoulders, and the little girl pressed close to him, her small hand patting his back in a gesture far too wise for her years. Neither had an umbrella. Neither seemed to notice the rain. "Excuse me," Margaret said, her voice sharper than intended. "What are you doing here?" The man jumped to his feet, quickly wiping his face with his sleeve. Up close, Margaret could see he was younger than she'd thought. Maybe 40, with kind eyes reddened from crying and hands calloused from hard work. The little girl peered up at Margaret with solemn brown eyes. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he stammered. "We didn't mean to intrude. I work here. I'm Miguel, the groundskeeper. We were just... We'll go." "Wait." Margaret studied them more carefully. The girl wore a thin jacket, inappropriate for the weather, and both of them looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "Why are you crying at my daughter's grave?" Miguel hesitated, glancing down at the girl who still held his hand. "Your daughter." His voice cracked. "Emily was your daughter?" Margaret's breath caught. "You knew Emily?" "I didn't know her, ma'am. Not really. But I know what she did." Miguel's eyes filled with tears again. 15 years ago, my wife Maria was dying of leukemia. We had no money, no insurance. I was working 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough. We were going to lose her. He paused, struggling to continue. Then a miracle happened. Someone paid for everything. All her treatments, medications, even our rent for a year. Anonymous, they said. We never knew who. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. She remembered. Emily had been 28 then, already running the charitable foundation Margaret had established but never really paid attention to. Emily had come home excited, talking about a case that broke her heart, a young woman dying, leaving behind a husband and a baby daughter. 3 years ago, Miguel continued, his voice barely above a whisper, Maria died anyway. The cancer came back, different this time. But we had 3 more years because of that angel who saved her the first time. 3 years for Maria to see our daughter start school. 3 years for memories. He looked at the headstone. When I got this job here, I learned that the woman who saved my wife was buried in this cemetery. I found out it was Emily Holloway. I've been coming here on my breaks ever since, just to say thank you. The little girl spoke for the first time, her voice clear and sweet. Daddy brings flowers every week. We tell Miss Emily about Mama and how she's watching over us from heaven, just like Miss Emily watches over her Mama. Margaret felt her knees weaken. She hadn't known. Emily had never told her about this case, about saving Maria. There were probably dozens of families, hundreds maybe, that Emily had helped. During the 6 years she'd run the foundation, before the car accident took her away, Margaret had shut down the foundation afterward, unable to bear anything that reminded her of Emily's passion for helping others. I closed it, Margaret whispered, more to herself than to them. After Emily died, I closed the foundation. I couldn't face it. Miguel's expression was understanding, not judgmental. Grief is different for everyone, ma'am. There's no wrong way to survive it. The little girl, whose name Margaret learned was Sophia, tugged on her father's sleeve. Can we share our umbrella, Daddy? The lady is getting wet. Margaret looked down, surprised to find she'd dropped her own umbrella without noticing. The 3 of them stood in the rain together, and suddenly, Margaret began to laugh, a sound she hadn't made in months, maybe years. It was absurd, all of them getting drenched beside a grave. but it was also somehow perfect. "I'm Margaret," she said, extending her hand to Miguel, Emily's mother. "And I think we should get out of this rain." What started that rainy afternoon became something Margaret never expected, a friendship. She learned that Miguel was struggling, working, long hours at the cemetery and a second job at a grocery store, barely making ends meet. Sophia was bright and curious, but attended an underfunded school where she couldn't get the attention she needed to thrive. Miguel's sister usually watched her after school, but the arrangement was becoming impossible as Sophia grew older and needed more stability. Margaret found herself thinking about them constantly. She drove by Sophia's school and saw the peeling paint, the overcrowded classrooms. She remembered Emily's passion for education, how she'd always said, every child deserved the chance to reach their potential, regardless of their circumstances. One evening, Margaret invited Miguel and Sophia to her estate. Sophia's eyes went wide at the grand house, the manicured gardens. But what caught her attention was Emily's old room, which Margaret had kept exactly as it was. Books lined the shelves, and Sophia gravitated toward them like a moth to flame. "Your daughter loved to read," Sophia said, running her fingers along the spines. "Just like me. But I don't have many books. The library is far, and Daddy works so much." Margaret watched the little girl and saw Emily, not physically, but in spirit. That same curiosity, that same hunger for knowledge and connection. An idea began forming in her mind, fragile as a soap bubble, but growing stronger. "Miguel," Margaret said as they sat in her living room. Sophia absorbed in one of Emily's old books. "I want to reopen Emily's foundation, and I want you to help me." Miguel looked shocked. "Ma'am, I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm just a—" "You know exactly what people need because you've lived it," Margaret interrupted gently. "Emily knew how to see people, really see them. But I didn't. I wrote checks and attended galas. But I never understood what it meant to struggle, to fight for survival while everyone around you lives in abundance. You can help me make the foundation what Emily wanted it to be." Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Margaret threw herself into the work with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She hired Miguel as the foundation's community outreach director, a position that paid enough for him to quit his second job and be home with Sophia. Together, they identified families in crisis, children who needed education support, individuals facing medical hardships without resources. Margaret started small scholarship programs, funded community health initiatives, and established mentorship opportunities. She finally read through Emily's old files and wept at the lives her daughter had touched. Each case represented a real person, a real family, real dreams that Emily had helped preserve. Sophia thrived in her new school, one of the first recipients of the Foundation's education program. She visited Margaret's house often, and slowly, Margaret began to fill Emily's room with new memories while honoring the old ones. Sophia would curl up in Emily's reading chair, and Margaret would listen to her chatter about her day, her dreams of becoming a doctor, her memories of her mother. On the one-year anniversary of that rainy day in the cemetery, Margaret, Miguel, and Sophia stood together at Emily's grave on a bright, sunny morning. This time, they brought a small plaque to place beside the headstone, inscribed with Emily's favorite quote, "The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well." "Thank you," Margaret said softly, touching the cold marble. "Thank you for showing me, even after you're gone, what really matters." Miguel put his arm around his daughter. "We all saved each other," he said simply. And it was true. Emily had saved Maria, giving her 3 precious extra years. That act of kindness had brought Miguel to Emily's grave, where his tears and his daughter's compassion had saved Margaret from a prison of grief and loneliness. And now Margaret was helping to save countless others, continuing Emily's legacy in a way that honored both her daughter's memory and her own newfound purpose. Sophia looked up at Margaret with those wise brown eyes. "Miss Emily isn't lonely anymore," she said, "because her love keeps spreading. And neither are you, Miss Margaret. Margaret pulled the little girl close, feeling Miguel's solid presence beside her, and knew that Sophia was right. Loneliness wasn't about being alone. It was about being disconnected from purpose, from love, from the human family that bound everyone together. Emily had understood that. Miguel and Sophia had reminded her of it. And now, in carrying forward Emily's work, Margaret had found her way back to the world of the living. The cemetery was peaceful that morning, full of the promise of continuing life even among the stones that marked life's end. And three people, connected by loss, bound by gratitude, united in purpose, walked out together into the sunlight, ready to make some difference, to live well, to honor the ones they'd loved by loving others. That was Emily's true legacy, not the marble headstone or the fortune she'd left behind, but the ripples of kindness that kept spreading outward, touching lives, healing hearts, and proving that even in the darkest grief, hope could take root and bloom again.